He was 70 years old, and he was running out of countries. This is not a metaphor. In the autumn of 1970, Meyer Lansky boarded a plane to Israel with the practical calculation of a man who had spent 60 years turning legal structures to his advantage, the law of return. Israel's foundational statute granting automatic citizenship rights to individuals of Jewish heritage appeared from the outside to offer exactly the kind of structural protection that Lansky had always sought, a legal wall built from another country's laws that the United States government would find difficult to climb over. The calculation was elegant. If Israel accepted him as a citizen, extradition would become both legally complex and politically fraught. The same instinct for finding the operative gap in any legal structure, the instinct that had built the Swiss banking network and the offshore shell corporations and the casino skim system, had identified, in the law of return, one more gap worth trying. What Lansky had not fully calculated was the Israeli Supreme Court. He arrived in Tel Aviv in July of 1970 in declining health without announcement. As an elderly man of modest appearance doing something he had thought through carefully and believed, on balance, to be his best available option. The Israeli press noticed immediately the story of a major American organized crime figure claiming citizenship under the law of return was, in the Israeli context, genuinely unprecedented. A collision of the country's founding humanitarian legislation with the complicated realities of what that legislation meant when its protections were invoked by someone whose life was as far from the Zionist ideal as Lansky's had been. Israeli newspapers debated the question with the intensity that Israeli newspapers bring to anything that touches simultaneously on law, identity, and the relationship between the Jewish people and the state created in their name. The Israeli government's initial response was not outright rejection. It was deliberation. The careful deliberation of a government that understood both the humanitarian implications of the law of return and the political implications of being seen to provide refuge to a man whom the American government had spent 4 decades attempting to prosecute. Meanwhile, Lansky lived in Israel. He stayed at first in hotels, then in a rented apartment in Tel Aviv. He walked on the beach in the mornings, a habit that mirrored in a different geography the Collins Avenue walks that the FBI had been photographing for years. He ate at local restaurants. He was photographed by Israeli journalists, observed by Israeli intelligence services, discussed in the Israeli press with the combination of fascination and discomfort that tends to accompany the presence of a controversial figure in a small country. He was 70 years old in a country he had never lived in, whose language he did not speak fluently. He existed in the particular limbo that legal deliberation creates, waiting for a decision that would determine whether, one more time, he had found the gap. The American government was applying diplomatic pressure throughout this period. The State Department made clear to its Israeli counterparts that the return of Meyer Lansky was a matter of American interest. Israel depended on American support in ways that made its government sensitive to American preferences, even when those preferences were not explicitly stated as demands. There was also a domestic Israeli dimension to the pressure. Within Israel, the question of whether the law of return should protect a man like Lansky was debated not merely as a legal matter, but as a question about what the state of Israel was for, about the relationship between the country's founding principles and the practical realities of who those principles were being asked to protect. The debate was genuine and sharp, reflecting something real about the tensions within Israeli society between idealism and pragmatism. In October of 1972, after more than 2 years of legal proceedings, the Israeli Supreme Court issued its ruling. The gap was closed. Lansky's application for citizenship under the law of return was denied. The court held that his documented criminal background placed him within the statutory exceptions, that a person with his history could reasonably be considered likely to endanger public welfare. The citizenship right that the law of return granted could, the court ruled, be overridden by these considerations. He was informed of the decision, and then he was placed on a plane back to the United States. The return journey was, in its way, the most revealing moment of the entire episode. Lansky had gone to Israel with a legal strategy, had identified a gap in the legal framework and attempted to use it, as he had always used gaps. The gap had been closed. The strategy had failed. And he was going back to face what he had been trying to avoid. The charges, the proceedings, the machinery of the American federal criminal justice system applied to a 70-year-old man with a serious heart condition. He returned without drama, without public statement, with the particular dignity of someone who has run out of moves and accepted that fact without making it into a performance. There were journalists at the airport. He did not speak to them. He walked through the terminal with the measured pace that the surveillance photographs had documented for 30 years. Unhurried, giving nothing away, the same quality of movement and defeat as in the long years when his position had seemed impregnable. The charges he returned to face fell apart. Witnesses died. Evidence was challenged on technical grounds. The primary conspiracy case was dismissed in 1973. By the mid-1970s, the government's case had effectively collapsed for reasons that had nothing to do with Israel. That would have collapsed regardless of whether he had gone or stayed. The legal strategy had failed. The underlying legal reality had held, as it had always held. But the Israel episode remained as the clearest public demonstration in a life conducted almost entirely away from public view of what it looked like when Meyer Lansky's options ran out. Not his legal options. Those survived the Israeli rejection intact. His geographic options. His ability to find in the structure of international law another jurisdiction, another arrangement, another wall built from someone else's statutes. He had always found another layer. In Israel, there was no more layer. There was only the Supreme Court's ruling and the plane home. He returned to Collins Avenue. He walked his dog. He ate breakfast at the same diner. The FBI surveillance car was in its usual position. And in this, as in so much else, the ending of the Israel story was also its most revealing moment. The man who had gone further than any other criminal figure in American history to insulate himself from legal accountability had come home, faced what was waiting for him, and outlasted it. He came home without the citizenship he had gone for. He brought back something else, the confirmation, final and public, that there was nowhere left to go, and that, finally, he did not need to go anywhere at all.